process of the resident. Got it. So the resident questions, concerns, and ideas for a better community can be addressed in a constructive and inclusive way. We promote public service, civil civic discourse, and collective efficacy. At monthly meetings and through the work of our 6 working committees, CPUN facilitates the discussion of key issues with neighbors, engages in proactive problem avoidance and amicable problem solving. CPUN is committed to providing a welcome and inclusive environment for all members of our community. We are an all-volunteer board of your neighbors and registered 501c3. And with that, I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along. We are going to do things a little bit differently than we normally do this evening, where we might have community updates. We've dedicated the entire hour to our very special guests from Denver Public Schools. We have Liz Mendez, who's Executive Director of Enrollment and Campus Planning, who has been a great liaison for this meeting over the past several weeks. We're also very happy to have Dr. Alex Marrero, the Superintendent of Denver Public Schools. Dr. Marrero, thank you very much for joining us. This portion of the meeting is going to be facilitated by Amanda Alshouse, a former president of CPUN and co-chair of our education committee. So any regulars of this meeting are going to get a little break from the heavy dose of me that you typically get. And I'm looking forward to Amanda's expert facilitation of this section of the meeting. If you're interested, we highly encourage you to stick around. CPUN has a lot of interesting activities going on, and we'll be discussing those during our board meeting, which will begin at 7:30, including our committee reports and a review of our guest speaker calendar as we prepare for the upcoming meetings. We also have a number of activities in the works, including some candidates forums that we're organizing for City Council District 8 and the mayoral election coming up this spring. We're working on developing a resource for residents who have expressed some interest in learning about our unhoused community members. We've got an update on some of the developments that are happening on the shops at Northfield, as well as Bluff Lake Nature Center. We'll also hopefully be conducting a couple of votes if the discussion gets us far enough along in that process regarding our INC membership, as well as a potential mural project that we've been developing in the community with a resident and local business owner named Cameron Burns. That will be, then we'll conclude this portion of the meeting with our treasurer's report. So with that, I do want to quickly spotlight our candidates forums. These are open to the public. Of course, we encourage everybody to join us. The District 8 Forum will be on Wednesday, February 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m. It's going to be at the Cube, which is right here on Northfield Boulevard, a couple of stones throw away from my house. And then the mayoral forum will be on Wednesday, March 8th, again from 6 to 8 p.m. We're still pinning down the final location of that, but it will be somewhere highly accessible to residents of Central Park. The format for these forums, if you're curious, will be a 1 hour kind of Q&A and introductory period that we will moderate. And then the second half will be more of a kind of meet and greet opportunity for everybody to meet the candidate at a table and pick up a pamphlet, that kind of thing. So we look forward to having you there in February for District 8 and in March for the mayoral forum. Again, I want to thank Liz Mendez for all of the work and time that she's put into helping us prepare for this evening, as well as Dr. Marrero for his presence here this evening. We get a lot of questions and comments about Denver Public Schools. I don't need to tell our representatives from DPS that this is a highly engaged and active community. And I can point to our turnout tonight, which is now quadruple what we typically get at these sort of meetings as evidence. And with that, I will hand it over to Amanda Allshouse to take it from here.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And I think I'll start by just passing the floor directly to Dr. Marrero for a few comments, and then we'll go into the format of the rest of the hour, which will be first some prepared slides from Liz Mendez, and then a Q&A that's sort of guided by questions that we've communicated in advance so that it would increase the likelihood that the information would be accessible tonight. But I'd like to give Dr. And Jeff, do you want to stop sharing while he's talking, and then we can jump back into sharing slides for the next portion. Okay, Dr. Marrero, welcome.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Jeff. Excited to be with you all this evening. I want to tell a little bit of how I was supposed to, then not, then partially, and I have good news. I'm here for the hour. Forgive me for not being in my garb, no tie. Just came out of the plane to beat the snow successfully, and I'm here. First news for you all: there's no school tomorrow. So if you're excited, you can put some thank yous in there. If you're upset, let's blame Rebecca Holmes. Let's blame her, right? If it was a bad decision, blame her. If it was a good decision, I'll take the credit for that one. All right. So if you haven't, it should be coming out any moment now. In all seriousness, there is no school tomorrow. The reason why I'm not in my appropriate attire is because I was scheduled to be in the air at around this time to land like around 8 or 9, I forget. And I was able to shift my flight. I wanted to be here, but also, of course, to beat the snow, to make some tough decisions. You can never win with a snow decision. 50% of the people hate you, 50 celebrate. So I wonder what percentage of the 50 is in this room right here. In terms of what we're going to engage, first, let me say I'm very much impressed. I see that you guys have a couple of hours planned for tonight. I want to say that I'm jealous, but I would be lying. I spend way too many hours in board meetings, so 1 hour is going to be just fine for me and the team. I have Liz Mendez, who you announced, but we also have Amber Elias with us. Amber, if you can wave to the crowd. And she's also going to share some highlights in terms of what we're dealing with in DPS. Very quickly, what is exciting for DPS, if you haven't been noticing, I'm sure you have. We just, beginning of the school year, had our strategic roadmap. It launched. It really has been our anchor in terms of how we function. And at the same time, our Board of Education has adopted policy governance. So aside from getting updates from us, if you haven't already, I invite you all to engage with not only the region member, which for you all is Director Quattlebaum, and of course the 2 at large, the entire board, because any way that you can influence end statements, which is our goals, or executive limitations, is how we get results in the new DPS, if you will. So much so that if I'm allowed to, I would love to come on back with some members of my team to do a policy governance presentation so we can see how we can function and how you all can truly influence the outcomes of DPS, the entire system, not just the school that your child may attend, the entire system. It's truly remarkable in terms of how we're building this plane and how we're aligning all our resources and values, the board values, and the board represents you all. I want to get into our presentation because hopefully in the public comment piece, there can be some Q&A as well, Amanda. Okay. All right. I believe I can pass it right over to Liz. Can I?
That works. Liz Mendez, and then Jeff, do you want to go ahead and share slides that Liz sent us earlier?
All right, thank you. Thanks for having us here, and thanks for the introduction. So I have just a couple of slides of sort of quick announcements that we wanted to make sure that we shared with you all before we launched the question and answer time. So you can go ahead to your next slide. Okay, so first wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this DPS board redistricting efforts that are underway. DPS, like the City Council and like other legislative bodies, is required to balance our board districts, our representative districts, after each federal census. And so you can see there in that picture, there's the current 5 representative districts that we have. And then Dr. Marrero referenced our 2 at-large members. We also have 2 at-large members. So what we have to do is make sure the total population in those 5 districts is close to equal. They currently are not. The total population in those districts currently is not close to equal. And so we do need to do some shifting. So we want to hear from you over the course of about the next month until February 20th. That QR code links to our board redistricting website. On that website, you will find a lot more information about the process, a slideshow that has a presentation of all of the options, as well as a feedback form that you can watch the slideshow, look at the options, and then send us your feedback. Or you can choose to attend a meeting. There are a list of meetings there and more to come. So we are planning on getting the word out and getting lots of feedback as much as we can. So hopefully you can get the word out to your communities and help us to increase the number of folks who know that this is going on. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to make sure that people are aware of is universal pre-K. So this is the new statewide program that came about because the voters approved this as a ballot initiative. And what this says is that every 4-year-old, or the year before a student starts kindergarten, all Colorado kids are eligible for a half day of funding of preschool, provided they complete the universal pre-K application and attend in a participating school or program like a DPS school. What we want to make sure that everybody's aware of is the slight difference between the enrollment process for 3-year-olds and the enrollment process for 4-year-olds. On this slideshow, I don't know if this will be shared with folks, but there are a bunch of links that people can look at later. There's a link at the bottom to the Universal Pre-K Colorado webpage, and then also a link to our webpage. So once you get this, you can do some exploring. But this talks a little bit about the process. Whether you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, it is a 2-step process this year. So for 3-year-olds, we would like you to go to the DPS school choice page first, and that's where you're going to choose schools. The next step for 3-year-olds will be to visit the UPK page to see if your 3-year-old qualifies for funding, because for 3-year-olds, there are some qualifying factors, and that's how families get funding. And then steps 3 and 4. Steps 3 is provide any requested documentation to either organization. And then step 4 is to get your results from DPS school choice. Step 4 is similar, but slightly different. 4-year-old process is similar, but slightly different. You start with universal pre-K application, and that's where you select your schools. Then you go to the school choice DPS application, and you fill out that application and just select universal pre-K. You don't select schools as a 4-year-old with DPS, only with UPK. And then the same, step 3 is the same. You may be asked to provide additional documentation. And step 4 is you get your school match from UPK if you have a 4-year-old. We have a hotline. DPS Enrollment Services has a hotline. I'm happy to answer questions about UPK, but the state also has a hotline and an email address to help answer questions as well.
Amanda, before you continue, can I just confirm that you show the meeting is recording? I just want to make sure that.
Yes, it appears it's recording, and I got the message.
Okay, great.
I just, I'll pause to just field a question that came up in the chat. Someone asked a question about the choice process for high school and whether choosing a DSST conservatory, did it specify conservatory? No, just a DSST school. I'm going to assume one of the two in the boundary are, if they would lose their spot at Northfield, if they didn't choose in round 1. Liz, do you want to just clarify that really quickly? And then a follow-up question is, are you guaranteed a spot in subsequent years? Right, so if you opt out of your boundary school, high school, Northfield in round 1, are you guaranteed a spot in subsequent years, or do you forego your spot altogether?
Typically, the following year, if you've chosen to leave your boundary and then you want to try to come back the following year, typically you have not lost your spot at your boundary school. I say typically only because everybody's situation is different and there's a lot of details that aren't included here. So I don't want to say something that everybody takes as true for them.
Yeah.
I really encourage you to call our enrollment hotline, and I will get that number and make sure I put it into the chat before I leave tonight. Talk to our enrollment team, tell your exact situation, and they'll be able to help you and give you the answers to questions like this.
I think that's a great idea. Everything can be simulated. All right. So let's just jump right into the first topic, which brings us in a bit back to Northfield, but in general, we'll start with zoning. So Jeff, so here I have a picture of the three zones: the elementary enrollment zone, middle school, which is shared with Park Hill, and high school, which is for Northfield. Within the elementary zone are the proximity zones for each of the elementary schools. Okay. So you've indicated that changes to the districts, and so in conversations leading up to today, you've indicated that changes to the district school zones are something that you'd like to do in the next few years. Similarly, some community members have reported murmurs that the district plans to move away from the enrollment zone model for elementary schools in Central Park. Can you talk about the goals and timeline and process for any changes to any of these zones or enrollment zones, and if in which schools would be impacted?
Sure. Yeah, for several years, we have been talking about the need to take a deep look at our school boundaries and our enrollment zones as a whole in the district. The pandemic, organizational change have kind of came as the top priority for the last few years. But, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we really can address our boundaries, taking a look at them and seeing if there are changes that need to be made. You ask about whether there's any particular impacts to schools in the Central Park area. I can't tell you that. What the process would look like would be seating a community committee to lead the work, to really dive into all the data around how our current boundaries are impacting the need for transportation, data around capacity compared to the number of kids who are attending each school and number of kids who are living in the boundaries, equity data, tons and tons of data that we would have to pull before we were able to present any kind of a plan to the board. But that all needs to come from the community. So we would need to seat a community committee to really go through that data. So I can't tell you any specific outcomes of that since we haven't started that yet.
Okay, and Dr. Morero, is there anything that you would add to that response?
I think, Liz, thank you for that. You did a great job. The only thing that I feel comfortable adding is back to the Board of Education and how you all can either influence or impact what they potentially could bring to the table. So under policy governance, there are end statements, which are goals, annual goals, simplifying it. But what can happen at any time, and I know that they're exploring executive limitations, which are either permissions or guardrails, depending on how they're written, which are instructions for me and ultimately the system. There has been some conversation about enrollment zones becoming executive limitations. So there is an opportunity there for the community to weigh in. So I would say reach out to our board to see where we are, but also possibly even to suggest some boundaries, and perhaps even inviting them to one of your sessions.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Do any of the board members have any follow-up items on that?
Sorry, Amanda, you're a little hard to hear.
Okay. Is it okay to move on to the next question, or do you have anything to follow up with that response?
No.
Okay. All right. That is not the next slide. Would be capacity. Way high there. There. All right. Okay. So the current projections for the Central Park community, or projections across all of Denver, show that Central Park is projected to increase by between 500 and 5,000 seats between years 2021 and 2026. So these figures are taken from Denver Public Schools fall strategic regional analysis in 2022. And it shows that the elementary number of seats is projected to increase by 300 to 500. Middle school is again split between Park Hill and Central Park. The Central Park portion is expected to increase by 100 to 300, with a loss of 50 to 100 in the Park Hill portion. And the high school portion is expected to increase by 300 to 500 seats. Okay. So just with that as the background of growth within this community in this region, we can go ahead and go on to the next question that's specific about Northfield High School. Okay, so this first slide includes information that we received in December of 2026 from Denver Public Schools, where the projection was that Northfield would level off at around 2,000 seats in the long run. DSST Conservatory Green would have between 500 and 550 seats, and then the campus capacity would be around 2,500 seats. The assumed choice-in rate for Central Park residents is 60%. And again, the high school is guarantees 35% of seats for out-of-boundary kids. Northfield High School. Okay, Jeff, next slide, please. So we recently learned that the new campus projection is that the campus will hold 3,225 students at a maximum, which is projecting 700 to 825 seats for DSST Conservatory Green, and a full size of Northfield at around 2,400 students. But the campus itself hasn't changed, just these projections. So a few questions here. Could you reaffirm your commitment that any child from the Central Park community in Denver that wants a seat at Northfield High School will have one? And also that 35% of seats at Northfield High School will be set aside for students from adjacent boundaries?
Yes. I'm not sure where the 3,225 seats came from, but I'll talk a little bit about where we are in our most recent conversations with school leaders about what we are expecting the enrollment to be at both of those schools. We are just finishing our projections process. And so I have been working with Principal Amy Bringdahl from Northfield to really talk about how many kids we expect in the upcoming years at Northfield High School, and how they continue to fit in the space that Northfield is using today. And we agree that Northfield can continue to accept any boundary student who would like to attend the school. We also agree that based on what we have seen in terms of the percent of boundary students who tend to choose to go to Northfield, if that trend continues, which what we have seen is that, so this current school year, the percent of 9th graders who live in the boundary and chose to go to Northfield was 68%. So we're seeing that it's right around 70%. It hasn't, it has changed over time, but right around 70% of the kids who live in the boundary choose to go to Northfield. We've seen that that's the upper end. So if we assume that that continues to be the upper end or the typical even, we believe that we can continue to serve all the kids who want to attend from the boundary, continue to take 35% of kids from outside of the boundary, and fit in the space, the 4 different buildings, all of which have classrooms for Northfield High School. We agree, Principal Bringdahl and I agree that all 3 of those things can work into the future. DSST, while that may be their technical capacity, that isn't the size that they are aiming for, nor the size that we expect them to be.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. This was based on the conversation that we had last week and the projection of 700 to 825 seats at Conservatory Green and 2,400 seats at Northfield.
I think that's the capacity. I think those are capacity numbers, not projection numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then the in order to have the campus better serve the students that are there, Northfield High School students and families requested an auditorium in 2026, but it was not included in the 2020 bond. And the campus continues to need this amenity as the student body does not fit in the cafetorium. It also, so Liz, you and I kicked off Saturday morning at another education-related meeting, and you'll recall that one of the speakers asked for everyone to think of one of the best moments that their family experienced in the past year, and mine was that my 6th grader then at McAuliffe was in a play, and they have an auditorium. And so, sure, it would be great for Northfield to have an auditorium for meetings and getting everyone together, but also just the arts and how that expands one's engagement at school and opportunities in general. What would it take for DPS to build an auditorium on that Sandoval campus?
I think it would take being included in the next bond when that comes around. We, as we enter the last years of this 2020 bond, we don't have extra funds, as you might imagine. The cost of projects, the cost of materials, the cost of labor has gone up significantly since we passed the bond in 2020. And so we don't have extra funds to take on new projects. So the best option is additional capital construction funding, which in DPS tends to come through voter approved bonds. And as many people know, especially Amanda, those bonds, creating the list of projects that are included in the bonds is done by a community committee, a very large community committee and subcommittees who take a look at a list of needs that come to us from staff and leaders and district central office staff and community members, bring together a whole big list of projects to be considered, and then the community committees go through a very rigorous process to sort of rank order and prioritize all of those needs, because there's always more needs than we have funding for. So it would need to be included as a part of that process, and then need to be considered along with all the other needs in the district as well.
Right. In that process, the district does sort of rank or put brackets around sets of priorities. Would you be willing to put an auditorium at Northfield in the top tier of priorities for the district for the CPAC to consider? Oh,
that's not something I can answer tonight. Without having really begun that process, I don't, not in a position to answer that question tonight.
All right. Dr. Moreira, is there anything you would like to add in discussion about capacity at Northfield? I see that there's a follow-up question in the chat about whether there are any plans to move DSST off of the campus. And we actually did have a question about at what point would DPS consider it necessary to move to dedicate the entire campus to one high school.
All right, I know there's 2 questions there. I'll take that last one. I would love to see Northfield be one entity with different opportunities for students, but I also know what I inherited. So there has been no conversation about DSST moving. I haven't engaged with anybody in that network, but not opposed to it. So next time I engage with Mr. Kurtz, I'll see if that's even in the realm of his desires, because if that is, then it's an easier conversation to have and more probable. But I would love to see that, quite frankly, down the road in the future. All right. I know that there was a time and place for co-locations, and where I came from in New York City, that became the norm. But I also know that there is a lot that we can do when we have one entity on one site. So I would love to get the majority of our schools in that form. In terms of the previous question, what I can promise, once I engage with the new bond committee, I can bring this topic up in terms of the auditorium. In terms of prioritizing it, just like Ms. Mendez, we can't prioritize that yet before we even start painting on the canvas.
Thank you. Excellent.
Amanda, can I clarify one thing?
Please.
In my conversations with Amy Bringdahl, we are able to look ahead and see that Northfield High School with the enrollment that we are predicting and, projecting forward, which, as we said before, includes accepting all students who want to attend and accepting 35% from out of boundary. When we say that it continues, that we can meet all of those things in its current space, that is not dependent upon DSST moving. So like we are, those are really two different things.
I understand. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, and so another question about capacity in the community related to the other end of the age spectrum served by DPS. So if you can, hopefully you can see the numbers on this chart, but here's a count of the number of elementary school classrooms at each of the 6 elementary schools in the community. So on that far right column, number of upper grade rooms, K through 5 at Inspire, at Isabella Bird. If you sum all of those up, you get to 21 or 22 classrooms per grade. But then in that middle column, there's a count of the number of ECE4 classrooms per grade. And in the far left column, there's a count of the number of ECE3 classrooms per grade. So with the anticipated prioritization of early childhood education, specifically with Governor Polis today during his State of the State address, prioritizing early childhood education, does DPS plan to build out the infrastructure to better support early childhood education across the district and specifically in this community?
Yeah, it is definitely a need that the ECE department is aware of, folks in my department and enrollment services is aware of, that there's really not enough ECE classrooms in the Central Park area. And we are constantly looking at ways that we can add additional seats for ECE. I know we have been talking with Swaggart this year about the possibility of adding additional classrooms for ECE. I have nothing to announce here about that, but I know those conversations are ongoing. And we are continuing to explore always, how do we increase the number of ECE seats? And I think this will come up in the next question you are about to ask as well. So I will leave it at that, but I agree. It's a need, and we definitely need to continue to figure out how to provide more classrooms.
Okay, well, yes, and in terms of where to put more classrooms, next slide, Jeff, there is some land that DPS owns in the Central Park community. I don't know if you all still call it the Park Street 2 campus. At some point, that's what it was called. I don't need to call it that, but I'm calling it that here because that's what people were calling it at one point. So here's a map of where it is. It's north of 56th. So that's that green community is the North End community. How do I describe this? And then the purple community is Beeler Park. And so then that would be Dick's just off the map to the left there. And so the cross streets at that red star are are Elmira and 60th. All right, so that's the land that I'm talking about in this question. I know that you know that, Liz, but just to clarify. So some questions there are, does DPS still plan to build a building on this parcel? How will this be funded and what will be built?
Yes, we still plan to build something on that parcel. We haven't done so yet, partly because we didn't have funds available, and partly because the need was still kind of, I think, forming. By the data of the number of students that we have in K-12, I'm going to have that caveat, in kindergarten through 12th grade, we have enough seats, enough room space at all of our schools to serve the population in the Central Park area. It is rare that we have a piece of property, and so we recognize that that's that is a privilege that we have, this piece of property that we get to hold and continue to consider what to use it for. Anytime we build a new building, we use bond funding for that. We just, we aren't funded as a district in a way that we can leverage other funds. So that's the generosity of voters have allowed us to continue to use bond funds to build new buildings where we need them. I suppose I should back that up a little bit. Sometimes it comes with development. So sometimes we have funding with development, but this one would have to be a bond. What would be built? I don't know. Again, we have we still do have enough room for all of the students in the Central Park area. I think there are several desires that we've heard expressed by the community, several different options that we've been discussing of, would it make sense to build an ECE center there? Would it make sense to, I know there are some people who would like to move separate one of the shared campuses and move one of the schools on the shared campus to that site. So I know there's a lot of different options. All of these options, or most of them, probably create a little bit of space to allow for some additional ECE classrooms at one or the other of the sites. And really, in advance of the next bond would be the time for us to begin to talk with the community, really look at whatever the current data is at that time about our forecast, about our population, and about our space capacity constraints, and really dig in and figure out what's the best use of that site. I recently walked it, and I was imagining, picturing all of the different things that could go there and trying to think about what makes the most sense, tucked in that neighborhood there. It is definitely a cozy little site in a nice, quiet neighborhood.
It is a nice site. Dr. Morrow posed a question to us in the chat. Do we have a vision for that site as a board? I think that we would also need to be data-driven about that, but I think that some of the options, I wouldn't want to speak without putting like 3 or 4 options out to the community and asking them to rank them. So I don't know that I want to declare what they are in case that would hedge a preference.
I didn't want a response now, but maybe an invitation for you to poll the community and get back to us, because we can definitely use that as data as well.
Right. And so I think I know the answer already, but would you prioritize a building on this site in the next bond?
You are right. Same answer applies.
Yeah. Okay.
Something
All
that
right.
we could definitely discuss, but in terms of prioritization, we haven't even, created the list in its entirety yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And we'll get on that with the data. Okay, I think the next question then, Jeff. All right, so here is a screenshot of Healthy Start Times, the video for Healthy Start Times from the DPS website. Just to recap, oh goodness, I have a little bit of a recap here. April 2021, the DPS Board of Education passed the Healthy Start Times. By the way, I had some comments that my sound was bad. Is it okay now? Was that better? Okay, great. DPS BOE passed the Healthy Start Times resolution that all middle schools and high schools start no later than 8:20, no earlier than 8:20 in the morning to support healthy sleep habits in adolescents. And then in the 2021-2022 school year, the district released options for implementing Healthy Start Times and collecting feedback. Options included trade-offs between extremely early start times for elementary and cutting buses. And then in May of 2022, the district announced a final plan which cut busing to DSA, Maury Middle, and moved 2 elementary school start times in the Central Park community 40 minutes earlier, being met with strife with the staff. So some questions. So, as pictured here in the video about healthy start times, there are an awful lot of cars on that road. So eliminating busing can increase reliance on cars in the absence of public transportation. What is DPS doing to release reliance on cars for getting kids to and from school, especially in the absence of cutting busing? And so if you can just describe how you work with RTD to improve access, whether RTD is responsive, and then do you ever take it upon yourselves to fill in gaps when you can see that RTD is not meeting needs?
Well, that's where I get tagged in. Hi, friends. My name is Amber Elias. I am the Executive Director of Operations Service Delivery in DPS. And more relevant to tonight's conversation, I had the distinct honor of helping to lead our way through the implementation of the board's resolution after it was adopted, which included our advisory committee and a number of feedback cycles with the community. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat here. There were a lot of questions in that first kickoff question. So I'm going to start to take them one by one. And if anybody wants to stop me in the middle, including Dr. Marrero, including anybody with any questions, please hop on in. The first thing I'll say is I appreciate you pointing out the cars on the road. One of our 6 end statements invites us to really focus on our sustainability initiatives. And so it's something that we're paying really close attention to as well. And we were really pleased in the process of Healthy Start Times to be able to preserve all but, boy, I believe 47 routes were preserved. So out of about 750 routes that we currently provide for our families and students, we were able to preserve all but about 50 of those. And that did, as you pointed out, Amanda, come with some trade-offs as we had to sort of wiggle things around to accommodate the directives contained within that resolution. But we were able to preserve all of that transportation. It did mean that we ended up losing some of those routes in really targeted ways. I want to make sure that we're grounded in the way that we looked at that. Using input from our advisory committee, we were able to really center equity as we preserved all of the bus routes that we could. We looked at average daily ridership across all of our bus routes. And then we looked at the FRL status of the students who are rostered to ride that bus. And so by factoring in both FRL status and average daily ridership, we were able to preserve all of our routes for the students who both use the bus the most and need to use the bus the most. And what that ended up meaning was that any school bus route, thank you for that clarification. I live in anagram or acronym land, and so I appreciate you clarifying for me. Any bus route who served on average 6 or more students eligible for free or reduced lunch, just 6, was preserved from elimination. And so we were able to preserve routes and ridership for many of our kids. You talked about, I think the next question that you talked about, I want to call out one more question. I think you talked about what we're doing to reduce reliance on cars. Even though we were able to preserve all of those buses, we retain that commitment to sustainability. And we know that with some of these new start times, as families adjust to the shift, we have worked with some of our schools to implement carpools or walking bus routes or walking routes where walkers are picking folks up. And that's really community-led, which is sort of the way that we've wanted to lead as we move forward. And so we're working school by school to identify some of the biggest needs that are emerging with our leaders and partnering with them to really kind of triage those issues on an individual basis. You talked about our partnership with RTD. You know, we're really fortunate to have a partnership with RTD, and as I think a key stakeholder with RTD, they're sort of always looking at their ridership in the context of their operational needs and priorities and values, just like we do. And so in our partnership, RTD provides DPS with discounted student passes, and we're able to distribute those to our families. And then we work really closely with them to identify sort of when we have needs that spike and when we don't. One of your questions was whether we ever took it upon ourselves to fill gaps in RTD's available routes with yellow buses in order to make sure that students have access. You know, we currently do this for students who are attending Northfield. We supplement RTD access with transportation for students with a disability. And when we've got those routes, regardless of the age served, these routes may be used by high school students through what we call the transportation exception process, if there's an available seat on a nearby route. Beyond that, you know, as you've noticed, our operational limitations too sometimes prevent us from focusing in on every gap. And we really work in conjunction with RTD to identify those gaps and work as carefully and strategically as we can to fill them.
Yeah, I can see that there are some follow-up questions regarding RTD and high schoolers. I think that it's a mile down the road from Northfield High School where the closest RTD stop is. So what's the longest distance that would be reasonable for a learner to be expected to walk either to a yellow bus or from an RTD bus to a school?
I'll pull these guidelines for you and drop them in the chat before we leave today if I've got time. We've got these designated by our district procedures, and they vary by grade level. So while I don't want to make up the numbers, for elementary schools, our walk zone is much smaller than it is for a high school student. And that is in part due to the fact that our high school students have access to RTD passes, while our elementary and middle school students don't. But I'll try to pull that, and so we can drop that into the chat.
Okay. All right, so a little bit more about the selection of bus routes to preserve. You know, we're undershooting the affordable housing build out of the Central Park community. I think sometimes that ends up being the last bit filled in. What would you want learners from households that would qualify for free and reduced lunch to know if they're considering moving into any of the income qualified housing in this community? Would they be foregoing bus service because they would be too few in number to access yellow buses? So, and then does that in turn hurt the diversity of this community because of the way that DPS applies the equity index?
I have to apologize. We are new. Again, we're like brand new over here to remote meetings, and I have got the navigation of children. I have to mute for just a second to deal with a parenting moment.
Okay. All right. So let's see if there's anything else I can ask while this is happening. Maybe Liz, you can clarify, is the equity index applied? It sounds like it's applied at the household level. Oh, okay, Amber's back. I'll go ahead and ask that now. All right, hi Amber. Thanks, great. It happens to all of us at all of the times. Okay, so again, when you're applying that equity index and too few in number students are qualifying for FRL to merit bus service, I would be concerned that that would impact the ability for the Central Park community to draw a diverse group of residents, because they would be concerned that there would be too few in number to draw yellow buses. What would you want those families to know?
I think what's really important to know is that we don't intend to recalculate those routes year over year. One of your questions, I know, was whether this was permanent. And for now it is. And partly the benefit of that is to bring a little bit of predictability and stability into this process and space. And so if a community is served by a yellow bus right now, we don't have any plans to kind of recalculate depending on any number of those factors, right? That will always, I think that's where we sit at this point. We value the diversity of our schools and our neighborhoods in just the same way that you've shared. And so we are always working with our school leaders and with our communities to identify how we can best meet those communities' needs, even when transportation isn't available.
Okay, I think that the concern still remains, because it sort of puts it on the individuals to solve the problem if this isn't something that the district is going to be looking at again. So we'll have to keep that in mind. All right. So then.
And I would just pop in and say, not just keep in mind, but continue to work with your schools, because we're working with leaders all the time as families and communities continue to identify what those individual needs are. We're working with our schools all the time to identify whether it's resources or mitigation efforts. Even if we can't shift bell times for next year, as we kind of collect what these impacts are, we really do use it to inform future policy decisions. And so I would say not just monitor, but continue to elevate to school leaders as well.
Okay, we'll continue reaching out to school leaders about that. Thank you. Okay, Jeff, next slide. Actually, next slide. All right. So this was positioned as being motivated by healthy start times, but we've heard frustration in the community and a perception that there's a lack of bus drivers, and then healthy start times were a way to make lemonade out of the situation. Can you just comment on whether that's accurate? And just anything about the implementation of healthy start times and perhaps what you've learned in that process that would change the way that policies are implemented in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is something we've all heard. After the board adopted this resolution, that was sort of how things started to churn, especially because it was just on the heels of the realignment of our bell tiers. We had previously had 23 different start and end times. And because of the national driver shortage, we realigned our start times into those 3 tiers that we're now familiar with, but were really a big shift where principals and schools had the ability to really choose their start time across the spectrum. It obviously stressed our system. That decision was really based on our operational guardrails. But then the board had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Meltzer about the sleep science, and it sort of so compelled them to move forward that these were separate. The issues are often conflated, and this is a rumor that we've heard, but we were hopeful that part of our information campaign, when the board allowed us to extend implementation by a year, we were hopeful that by sharing the benefits of later start times for our older students, that we were able to clear some of that up, but we know that it will continue to persist. You know, all we can continue to do is reiterate that, you know, while the reaction is bound in some ways by some of our operational limitations, we really are hopeful to see the evidence, and we're starting to see it emerge through the national trends for later bell times for older students, that ultimately this move, while the shift will be challenging, will result in better outcomes for our older learners.
And then next slide, Jeff. Have you calculated what dollar amount you would need to pay to have more drivers and to have more buses so that elementary schools could avoid starting as early as some of them are scheduled to start right now? Is that something that you would consider prioritizing in the upcoming, I guess that would be a combination of bond for the buses and mill levy for the drivers? I know the answer already. Do you want to say it?
You can say that part.
Okay.
And you know, I do want to point out that we increased our bus driver pay last year by approximately $5, and we changed work conditions to ensure full-time employment for all of our drivers. And so we've made a lot of effort to sort of increase and improve the opportunities for our drivers, and we're still 45 or 50 minutes or 45 or 50 drivers short. And so this national driver shortage impacts everyone locally, state level, and it's hard to know the dollar amount that would fix it. I do think while we were meeting with our advisory committee, we calculated what we might have to do to ensure kind of that everybody got to fall into that most desirable tier. And I think it shot up our drivers to maybe 350, a huge number that we may never be able to fill. But more than that, it would eliminate sort of the quality of life that we've been able to achieve by offering our drivers full-time employment. And so it's a fine balance here. With respect to the bond or mill levy question, I think you already know the answer to that, but I do appreciate you raising it, and it's been sort of on our radar throughout as something that we may need to consider to help support our transportation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'll start from the bottom with questions. With tracking student data, you said you would be tracking middle and high school students. Are you also going to look at younger student scores to see if this impacts them negatively, but like sort of stratified by schools that had such a major shift?
Yeah, absolutely. We were able to kind of identify our whiplash schools, the ones that saw the most significant shifts. We'll target those. But we also know that schools on the margins of 7:30 bell times and 9:10 bell times are the ones who will experience kind of the greatest impact as they move to that. I've told this story publicly a few times now, but my children are in DPS, and they moved to a 7:30 bell time the year before the pandemic. And boy, was that an adjustment that first year. And we've heard from families who have a 9:10 bell time. Those will also be families who experience that big kind of whiplash adjustment, because it changes your routine in your family. It changes things significantly. And so we'll absolutely be monitoring what student outcomes look like, especially for our younger learners as well.
Dr. Marrero, would you like to add anything in the context of healthy start time implementation?
I think Amber did an incredible job. I love the fact that she anchored it around the science. Yes, there are other reasons after the fact, just to make it a robust and a well thought out and strategic initiative, but it is anchored in science. And I know that it's causing some, and it will cause some more disruption. But that's not to negate the fact that there are current struggles with our schedule as is, both domestically, but also, as Amber mentioned, in terms of us being as efficient as we can possibly be.
Okay. And is it okay with you all if we can download questions in the chat? Can we consolidate those and send them to you and then distribute answers to the community? Yeah, I know that it'll be tricky to get through questions that have come up during the dialogue right now. But that's okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. And
Amanda, I just want to quickly acknowledge that we are at the hour, but I want to continue the conversation and make sure that we get through the question set.
Well, no, I think that was going to be the stopping point. We had questions about calendar. You've released the calendar. I hope everybody knows that the DPS calendar has been released. I had a question about like how far in advance that's typically done. We will follow up with that. We find volunteerism very important. We want to know more about how community members can become more involved if they don't have a child in DPS, how they can link their skills and better serve the DPS community. We'll follow up in writing about that. And then just safety in general, if there are any major updates here, but then just to also put the word out, we're planning a separate forum dedicated to the topic of safety, which merits its own time. And there we are.
There's the school calendar.
Yeah, there's the calendar. So many thanks to our experts for joining us tonight, Dr. Marrero, Liz Mendez, and Amber Elias from DPS. And we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Team DPS. Well done. And I'm looking forward to responding with those lingering questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. For those of you that remain on the call, part of why we were able to schedule this when we did, or why we scheduled this when we did, was because we know the school choice process is active midstream as it is. And we hope that the information that the district was able to provide gave you some context that helped your decision making alongside the traits of the school that you're looking to potentially enroll your child in. So I want to thank Amanda Alshouse and Carol Hunter for their all the work that they put into organizing this, just the logistics and the question set. It was a tremendous amount of work, and I think time well spent. For the community, we will make sure that this video gets posted and distributed via our email list, and encourage everyone to follow us on Facebook and share the link with any families you know that might be interested. Let's see here. Okay, we do have a minute for a public comment period. This is a traditional public comment period where you're welcome to speak, but there's not a Q&A or anything like that. There won't be any bi-directional conversation, but we do have 5 minutes. Can I get it's sort of hard for me to see with the way that the screen share is set up, but can anyone just kind of raise their hand or unmute themselves briefly if they have something they'd like to say so I can allocate time properly? Anybody? Nope. Okay. In that case, we will just quickly pivot to our board meeting, which again is open to the public and everyone is welcome to stay for. Board members, are you okay with going straight into the meeting? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Great. All right, let's start with our committee updates. I don't mind going for the outreach committee. We had a meeting just the other day. I think the big thing that we talked about are these candidates forums. There's some other stuff that we'll get to at a subsequent meeting, but the candidates forums are our main project at the moment. I'll spare this group going through those details as we have a dedicated slide on that later in the presentation. Does anyone from the DEI committee have anything to share?
Just that we have our kind of semi-monthly meeting on the 4th Tuesday in January. So next Tuesday at 6 p.m. We'll have our DEI meeting. We'll also be discussing questions to submit for the candidate forum. So actually I'll post a link to RSVP to the DEI meeting in the chat, and also just for everybody to have the RSVP form for the February candidate forum. And that is also where people can suggest questions for the panel.
Great. Anything from education other than what you just did?
Oh, I think you've heard enough from us for now.
Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and reiterate. I know that the chat was very full of comments, and we will address those. And I know that it can be frustrating to go to spend the time to go to an in-person meeting and not be able to fully engage. And so I apologize for giving that experience to people. And I touched on a couple of the comments, but we'll be sure to follow up on more of those.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me again because of the screen share. I can't see what those comments were, but Amanda, I'm happy to help download and process those. Health and safety. Any update there? No. Safe streets.
Yes, I don't know that Amy Campbell, who's one of our co-chairs, is still on the call in the meeting, but Amy, are you there? Nope. We will be meeting again in February, and I think Amy is looking to get someone from Denver Streets Partnership to speak with us because we need some guidance as to how to deal with various city entities on some issues. And I want to give a big shout out to Amy Campbell and Sarah McGregor, who are just doing an incredible job with the Safe Streets Committee. And one thing I know is happening is the folks who live on Emporia, who have had for years problems with safety in terms of traffic and that sort of thing, are coming together, and they are meeting, and they are going to be a force to be reckoned with. So I thank all of them. They are going to be having, I think, a meeting the end of January, but I'll keep everybody posted on things on the website.
And this is specifically Emporia, south of Martin Luther King,
Yes.
down to 26th, just in case there's anyone that's on this call that would want to be involved with that conversation and you're not currently in the group, let us know and we can connect you.
The numbers are growing.
Finally, Sustainability Committee.
I don't have an update there, but I did want to add on to the communication and outreach part to say I picked up today 50 bags from the Central Park Business Association and would appreciate any volunteers for help distributing them. It definitely does not have to be tomorrow because I don't think any of us wants to go anywhere tomorrow. But if you are so brave as to do so, I probably can't get you any bags until Thursday anyways. But if anybody wants to email me later or now with volunteering to distribute bags, we have 50 of them total. It's kind of a mix of a lot of concentration up on the north end, but also kind of throughout the rest of the neighborhood. So just email me, please, if you are able to do that, because if you tell me tonight, I'll probably forget.
Thanks, Mark. I can volunteer, but I will also email you. Great. Brad, I see you raised your hand. Is that to volunteer or to ask a question?
No, it's ask a question. This is actually for Mark. Mark, someone told me that you won a grant for bike racks at a school in the district. Do you have anything more to share about that?
Sure, happy to. Yes, through the Sustainable Neighborhoods program that Jeff Horsfald signed us up for years ago, that's still active, and they have a grant program. And I applied a while back to get grants for DGS Northfield because I noticed they had a lot of kids biking to school, including on cold and icy days and snowy days. Even this morning, I saw some kids biking there in shorts somehow. And they had a significant shortage of space to lock up bikes, and were running out of, or they were actually having some bikes stolen because there wasn't enough place to lock them up. So yeah, we were able to get a grant from the Sustainable Neighborhoods program, and it's going to pay for 3 of the really big bike racks that are like 18 bikes each to get installed. The installation date is to be determined based on the weather, because this is not the time of year for installing that kind of stuff. But we got everything worked out with DPS and whatnot. And so if there's other schools that also have a need for bike parking and stuff, we're happy to apply for 2023 funds if they have that, and to help everybody out. But so far, we were finally able to secure some funding for DGS Northfield.
That's great. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Brad. Yes, congratulations, Mark. Well done. Thank you. All right. For guest speaker calendar, this has been, I think, one of the more impactful calendars. Go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
Hey, Jeff, before we move on, there was a comment or a question in the chat about a quick question on the follow-up regarding getting a meeting with Northfield Mall redevelopment from the last meeting. Happy to give a quick update on that, about the meeting that we had if you want, or we can have Tricia clarify exactly what she was asking about.
I've got a dedicated slide for that a little later.
Okay, we'll get to that later then. Great, thanks.
Yep. And I was texting with Amanda in the background. My mouse is insanely skittish. Like I just touch it and it changes the slide. So I'm sorry. I hope that wasn't distracting throughout the call. What I want to say though is I think this has been one of more effective board years in terms of the guest speaker calendar. Like a lot of really great turnout for really important stuff. So looking forward to keeping that going. Remember, there's no board meeting next month, but we're doing these candidates forums in their place, which I think will be highly valued by the community. So we have that to look forward to. We just have a couple slots left before the end of the year. I'm working on one potential one with Mandel that I don't want to describe just yet, but if there's a passion amongst a board member to get one of these last couple of slots, do let me know. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep plugging away at filling these rows. All right, so the candidates forms, I just want to provide a update for everybody on this one. On the District 8 one, we're in really good shape. We've got location. Mandel has graciously agreed to come help me make sure the tech works, which is what I should have done months ago when we started all this mess. So Mandel's going to come help me out, and I know Jack has offered to help out as well. So we will make sure that one is ready to go. We also, thanks to Mark, have RSVPs out to all the District 8 candidates that have met the sort of thresholds of the city. So we're in pretty good shape there. Liz has a graphic for us put together a graphic for us to help us promote that. I think with these sorts of things, that's the biggest way the board can help, is to help get the word out about it. The other thing that the outreach committee is working on is organizing questions. You'll recall that the first hour is just going to be introductions plus 2 to 3 questions, depending on the number of people that we have in attendance and how much time we have to allocate. So we're looking to kind of get 2 really strong candidates for a city council person. Liz has also put together a Google, forgive me, Liz, what's it called? Like a Google survey sort of format.
Yeah, it's the Google form. It's
Form,
that
yeah.
the bit.ly link that I put in the chat. It's like bit.ly D8 CPUN RSVP.
Yeah.
If you just go to that, that's the form.
Okay, great. So we'll be sending that around to see if there's any resident questions that bubble up in a cluster or something like that. But really, we're in good shape, and thanks to Mark and Liz and Brian Weber as well for the help there. Same deal for the mayoral forum. I think the issue that we're having right now is just pinning down a location. That's the biggest thing. We thought we were going to have it at Denver School of the Arts. I took a tour there. Looked great, had all the applications sorted out. And when I paid the $25 application fee, I failed to notice that it also came with a $500 venue fee, which I tried to argue with my contact at the district about our status as a 501c3 volunteer board, all that kind of stuff, arguing like while political in a sense, it really isn't partisan or in any kind of activist sort of way, for lack of a better way of putting it. But they declined. So Brian Weber's connected us with Swigert, who's offered up a gymnasium. I think the only question there, and Mark, I think I saw a response from you earlier today that your experience with gymnasiums is that from an attendee perspective, they're not bad in terms of echo, in terms of heat, that kind of stuff. That was my concern about a gym.
Yeah, my recollection is that they can work as long as there's not noisy machinery or AC systems or HVAC systems in the background. They'll work fine. But an auditorium obviously works better if it's available. But I feel like a gymnasium is good in terms of we can definitely fit lots of people in it, and I think with amplified sound we should be fine.
Okay. But we're going through the same process for questions, getting RSVPs out, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really just committing to a venue that's the holdup here. Does anybody have any questions about where we are or the process that we're going through to stand these up? No? Okay. These are always great events. It'd be really great to have all the board members there in person and engaging with residents. Of course, getting the word out is the most important thing that I'll ask of the board. If you're interested in helping with the question set or any other aspect of the planning, you're welcome to join as well, of course. Okay. Other activities. Okay. Well, at least Mark, since someone was curious about it, I don't mind skipping ahead to the shops at Northfield call that you and I had. Do you want to summarize?
Yeah, happy to do so. Do you have a slide? Oh, you got it in the middle here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jeff and I were able to do about a half-hour call with a couple staff members or executives, or I'm not sure exactly who they were, at is it Stockdale Capital, the folks who purchased the shops at Northfield, the mall there. So this does not include anything north of Northfield Boulevard, and does not include anything, I want to say east of, I don't know what the Edge Street is over there, like something in the east, or I don't even remember what the streets are there right now. It's just the shops at Northfield specifically, not runway 35 north or anything like that. But I found the call very encouraging for a few different reasons. One is they very much want to curate a mix of stores that they feel like will activate the area and have much more activity, like have much more engagement from the community there. They seemed very interested in community engagement from the broader area. So they were looking for, I mean, they kind of used examples of like, this would be something you would see in LA or New York or Austin or something like that, and wanted brands that kind of fit a certain mold that I think both Jeff and I felt would, be stuff that's more popular around the neighborhood. Now, they did specify Shake Shack as an example, to which I forgot that I was on video and made a face about, because I'm not a burger guy, and I feel like there's too many burger options out there already. But they were more using that as an example of, they would rather do something like that than a Wendy's or McDonald's or et cetera. They also seemed interested in regular engagement with CPUN, which would be a first for the Northfield Mall folks, including potentially giving us some options that their research folks thought of as specific things we could put into our survey of companies that they potentially be talking about. They also let us know, before we had heard it elsewhere, that they're going to be putting a Bolero in where the I'm thinking
GameStop?
Circuit City.
GameStop?
No, it wasn't GameStop. It was what's it called? God, I can't remember. And I used to go the place where you play at the video games and stuff.
Game Works?
Target.
Yeah, GameWorks. There you go. Thank you.
GameWorks.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
we're too old. Yeah, they're putting in a bowling place there. Apparently, the lease has been signed already, so they felt like they could let us know about that. And they were also hoping to focus first on building out the Main Street area, adding some activities to that area, and making it sort of a more actively engaging place for the community, and then filling out their empty retail space, and then maybe turning to filling in some of the ads that are still undeveloped in the mall. But they were talking about monthly or every other month check-in calls with us, and like I said, engagement with our surveys as well. And then I think we had already heard about the Nike and the PF Chang's coming. I don't know what Carter's is, so I can't really comment on what that means. But maybe I'm showing my age again.
I think
like
Carter's is a baby clothing store.
Yeah.
It's baby clothes, which I have
Okay.
a lot of. So
Okay, well, there you go. So some of us will be very interested in that place, and others of us have, tweens and teenagers now and feel old that people are still buying baby clothes, but that's okay. So those are the kinds of things they were looking at. But again, they were very interested in feedback from the community as well. I think we could certainly, probably get them to I don't know if they'd want to join a massive call or not, but they definitely wanted to engage regularly, and I'm pretty happy with that. I was amazed that Jeff even got a phone call with them, and then for them to like volunteer on their own that they would want to do future calls had me kind of almost jumping on the camera again in excitement. So
Yeah.
and my apologies to anybody who's a Shake Shack fan if I was dismissive of it on the call and did not represent your views appropriately. But again, I'm not a burger guy, so.
The horse falls are happy about the example. The only thing I'd add to that is just some of the logistics as far as timelines that he described. So yes, let's do monthly calls, let's do quarterly survey type of stuff. That's very helpful. These brands, Nike, PF Chang's, Carter's, Bolero, those are all signed. Signs are up in some instances, and that's going in now. So we're talking very short periods of time before these things open. The activation that they were describing is going through the city process now. What they're looking at is nothing major in terms of construction, but rather cosmetic, kind of some steering activities through landscaping, adding I think the example he gave was like a freestanding rock climbing wall, something that drew people into the middle without tearing up a bunch of concrete, that kind of thing. He described that as being kind of on a 12-month timeline to have all of that stuff done. And then the vision that he presented that Mark kind of described in the 12 months or so that would follow that. So this is probably a 12 to 24 month timeline before you really start to see the vision unfold as it was presented to us. But he was pretty systematic in the way that he laid it out.
We also
So-
had a question in the chat about the process for providing feedback. That's still in development, but I would say they were open to us coming up with specific ideas or groups or categories, with the caveat of they know internally from past conversations with a lot of the companies that are already out there that they kind of know who's looking to expand in the Denver market and who's not. We also did discuss the specific idea of locally owned stuff coming in. And to that, they were, shall we say, a little more skeptical of the economics working out for the locally owned places being a viable option and being able to afford rents. We'll tease that out a little bit more and keep that in our side of the conversation, because I know that that's been something raised by the community a lot. And that's something we'll certainly be looking at, whereas they're probably more looking for brands that are, new to the area, but looking to expand in Denver that have somewhat of a national presence. So.
Any other questions, Mark? Again, I'm sorry. Chat.
Jamie, I don't think they're going to be able to force Target to better stock their shelves. Sorry. They'd have to add another Target probably to be able to fully meet the demand at that store. So,
yeah.
I think it's
a
just
good question.
bad management.
I don't disagree with you, but there's only so much that the landlord can tell the tenants how to run their shops, right? So.
I'll quickly just pivot to a similar, I guess, kind of call I had with Bluff Lake Nature Center. They are in the midst of a major fundraising campaign because they have a lot of capital projects that they want to do. Big ambitious stuff that they see as kind of helping Bluff Lake to kind of take the next step in terms of its role in the community and its presence and visibility in the community. And so they've asked, which we're happy to do, is to just kind of include some links to some surveys that they're putting together around, these are the 10 to 15 projects we're considering, how highly would you value each of them, so that they can start to prioritize some of what they're doing. That kind of period of survey will take place over the next 2 to 3 months. Then they'll kind of go away, work out the plan, kind of figure out what the priorities will be, what the price tag associated with them will be, and then in the fall perhaps come back with another round of community engagement that's a little more detailed on exactly what the plan is and how people can get involved and share their opinions, that kind of thing. So good things from Bluff Lake. Happy to see them doing well and kind of growing that entity. Any questions about that? No? Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up was, and I sent this, I know, over the weekend on a holiday weekend, so I apologize for the short notice, but one of my goals for this board year had been to put together some kind of event or resource or program on the unhoused members of our community and issues of homelessness. And so one of the first step that we took towards doing that or addressing that was to ask a couple of questions of residents in the most recent pulse survey. The strong response that we got from residents was that they preferred to receive this kind of information in a written format over something such as a community meeting or something like that. And they also expressed a strong preference for a couple of items above and beyond, and that was how the city is addressing homeless encampments, and forgive me, I'm reading it off of another screen, and then crime and safety pertaining to people experiencing homelessness, followed closely by, or not closely, but in kind of a middle tier by city policies and procedures, as well as opportunities for resident involvement regarding how to address homelessness. Those were all the things that met kind of at least 50% said, yes, they're interested. And so the proposal I kind of put together was for a, I don't, interactive is too strong a word. I'm not technical enough for that, but kind of a slide deck, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we could PDF and distribute, that would have kind of high-level spotlight information, links out to other resources, that kind of thing, that would address those questions in the format that residents have expressed an interest in receiving, and that it would be informed by or done in collaboration with as many experts in the field as possible, including the city's host office as well, and Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, a number of other entities where we've established relationships and inroads. I don't know if anybody really got a chance to look at that, but what I really wanted to do is get board feedback on whether it was made sense, whether there were ways to improve it, anything like that. Did anyone get a chance to take a look?
I did, Jeff, and I think Mark did as well. I saw.
Yes, you both. Thank you. I did send it to the executive committee first, just to make sure I wasn't totally off base, and I did incorporate their feedback before sending it to the rest of the board at large.
This is Liz. I mean, as you know, I'm very interested.
Yeah.
In the, and so something I think a slide deck, and maybe if we wanted to kind of go over it also, like to have it, if you want to fill out kind of the rows of like how we do the first hour in upcoming months, I think kind of unpacking what's on that slide deck in a future meeting. And then I think another kind of mode of communicating it is actually also kind of unpacking it over a couple of months in our front porch, like the CPUN corner.
Yeah.
In the front porch. I think that's like, so having like putting together the content and then like finding different platforms so that it kind of reaches the greatest number of folks. I also think I would center kind of contextualizing, like using the MDHI report on the state of homelessness to really contextualize the issue, because I think that the responses on the survey tell me how folks in our community think that homelessness affects them, but it's not that those responses aren't really about how homelessness affects the people who are homeless. And so I would just say that however we put it together, framing it within kind of that the way it touches our community is not necessarily the central way that the city or organizations or people experiencing homelessness address it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think I appreciate all that feedback, Liz, and like all of it. And what you just said at the end there was one of my big concerns, and one of the things I identified as a risk is that I have the same interpretation that if not handled properly, that the information could appear hostile or antagonistic towards the unhoused community, which is the opposite intention, and that treating all of these people with dignity and respect is a principle of how we would proceed. And if we're not doing that, then we're failing. And I think what you just suggested is a really good way to help offset that risk. And I think it's one reason why expert guidance from people like Jamie Rife, who's talked to us a couple of different times, would be so important. Another risk that I identified as I was thinking about this was that my goal would be to have something out to the community roughly by the end of our board year, which is mid-May. We're going to have a new administration at that time. And with a new administration will likely come changes to some of these policies that residents have expressed interest in better understanding. And so do we create confusion by putting something out there just as a new administration and a new city council is sworn into office and stuff immediately becomes up for debate again. Is this the sort of thing that we might need to break into pieces, or perhaps just wait until the fall to decide to put out there so that we're not creating confusion?
Hey, Jeff, Brian, I wonder if going to Councilman Herndon and getting his unofficial opinion on something like that might be worth a question.
Yeah, any chance that, again, I'm not used to sharing my screen. Any chance Amanda's on the call?
I have not seen Amanda tonight.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. You know, there's aspects of what the community expressed interest in, like ways to get involved, stuff like that, that we could release before some of the more policy-oriented topics. But I'm also just not quite sure that that would satisfy. It seems like there's utility in having kind of one, as long as it's not too enormous, one kind of guidebook or resource. It's something to think about. Maybe this is a topic that if you're interested, you can email me, much like I will email you, Mark, about distributing bags. That was a reminder for myself. And we can kind of form a little working group just around this project, which I welcome anybody that has passion and time and interest. Does that work?
It works, Jeff, and I appreciate what you're doing here and what you're instigating, and I mean that in a good way. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, let's see. We got a little time here. We have some decisions to make. Vote is maybe the. Did I put Nation Builder on there?
Jeff, I added it. I sent you an email today. I added.
Oh, okay. I thought that caught me off guard. I didn't play that off very smooth. The first thing, and I think the easiest thing to talk about, is our renewal in INC. I want to give the floor to Carol, who's going to talk a little bit about the most recent INC meeting that she attended, and then as our kind of regular representative with this group, talk about the value in being a member of INC in general, and then we can kind of vote thumbs up or down on this $40 renewal fee.
Do we have enough people to do that?
We do. I just checked.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian. I'm sorry. I feel bad that I'm flying so blind here. Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Oh, okay. I am the delegate for CPUN to the INC, which is the neighborhood cooperation group, and they are the umbrella group for all of the RNOs, the registered neighborhood organizations, of which we are one in Denver. And they meet, I believe it's the second Saturday morning of every month. And they have a lot of the same structure. They have a board and they have delegates and they have committees. In fact, their committees are very similar to our committees. I think the only difference with one is there's a parks committee and there's a zoning committee, which we don't have. There was a bit of a shakeup last year with the resignation of the board president and some other people. And so now there is some elections are coming up in March. And so there's a lot of shifts going on. I think that being a member is extremely important. And I think it's important for a lot of reasons, because we can share our business. And I mean that in a very positive way. I think we can support one another. I think we can get ideas. We can learn from one another, from other neighborhood organizations. And what I'd like to do is have INC, just in terms of my sharing information, take a little bit more prominent role in terms of on our website. And when we have our update every 2 weeks of committees and that sort of thing. And so that would entail, just what I've learned, sort of bullet points from the meetings, and what the focus has been. They also have guest speakers, just like we do. posting the recordings, that kind of thing. I just think it's really important to know what other RNOs in the city are doing and how they're solving their challenges. So, and another thing they're doing is going hybrid. They've been on Zoom for over 2 years, and that means that they obviously, like us, we continue with Zoom meetings, but they will be having face-to-face meetings in various neighborhoods, which I think is really wonderful. Their board elections are in March. This last Saturday, a couple days ago, the focus was on from the education committee. They have a new person who is taking that role to chair the committee, and she's extremely energetic. They had some wonderful speakers, and Amanda also attended. And Amanda, if you want to say anything about that, please feel free. But one really relevant speaker was a gentleman. His name is Brian, B-R-Y-A-N, like our Brian. Wilson is his name, and he has taken it upon himself to shovel sidewalks around in his community around this community schools. And he wants RNOs to hook up with their community schools and figure out how to get the sidewalks and what he called curb cuts, which I hadn't heard of before, shoveled out so that the kids can get to school safely. So there was just some very relevant stuff going on and some good speakers. And I just would like to see INC heightened a bit more in our world.
Thanks, Carol. And thank you for all the time that you put in there. It's much appreciated. So I'm going to call this to a vote, ask for a second to renew our annual membership with INC.
I'll second.
Thanks. Do we have any objections? Let me ask it that way. Going once? No? Okay, then settled. We will renew with INC. Nation Builder renewal is coming up. I don't know how deep we want to get into this. Brian, is the
invoice has been paid by Mark, but I have not reimbursed him.
Okay.
So I will make a personal plea. Please don't leave me hanging.
Yes, it's on. It's been recorded. Yes, we owe Mark a good chunk of money. Okay. And that was planned and budgeted, everyone. That's not anything unexpected or anything like that. So we're good there for now. We do want to talk about Nation Builder more in the coming months, but nothing we need to get into tonight. I think the last thing that we need to talk about is this mural project.
Jeff, formally, we should just say, I move that we approve the Nation Builder, and I think Mark seconded it. We just want to make sure there's no objection.
Sorry, apologies. Yes, I move that we renew the Nation Builder for $6,060.
I strongly second.
Any objections? None. Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay, the mural project. This has been kind of floating around for a little while now, and we kind of need to get to a place where we can make a decision. Another thing I sent around over the weekend was kind of a high-level look at where we are with this project. Would the board like me to kind of recap the key points, or just do people kind of understand where we are? I'm happy to recap.
I'm familiar. I think we're still waiting on cost estimates was the main thing.
Yeah, so I got based on information I got from Sand Creek's mural at about 58 cents per square foot. We need to budget about $400 every other year for maintenance. They spend about, their mural is 4 times the size as what this space would be. They spend about, excuse me, I don't have that number right in front of me. So their mural is about 2,800 square feet. Ours would be about 700 square feet. So it's about $400 every other year for maintenance. For me, $400 every other year is small enough that I think we could kind of cover it within our existing funding, like the MCA money, for example, which would mean that we wouldn't need to identify a dedicated funding source, such as like a fundraising ask of residents or something like that to cover it. But that is still an open question. I think one of the things that came up last time was who has the appetite to pay that amount. I think we have it within our existing infrastructure to cover a relatively small amount.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about $400 every other year, as somebody on the fundraising committee, I think that's something perfectly within our capability.
Hey, Jeff, I think one of the concerns I have is potentially, a major, graffiti event or something, or the infrastructure was damaged, or, I don't know if I do know our liability insurance would not cover that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we would need to talk with Denver Parks and Recs about that, on if there was something that happened as a result, would we get a release of liability from them to us and the other company. That I think that would be necessary before we would undertake this.
So like if the wall crumbled or something, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it caused damage, and then they would expect us to pay for that or something like that.
Yeah, I don't. It's probably worth confirming, and I'm happy to do that, Brian. I don't think that the mural obligates us to anything regarding the wall. The wall was there. We'd just be responsible, like you said, maybe the other example you gave of a graffiti incident, that's what the cost that I was talking about would be for.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to just ask the question. And from my perspective, since we do not have liability insurance, and if we were actually, I'm not, I'm something that would say that CPUN is not liable to Denver Parks and Rec, and that they're allowing this to happen and things like that. I think it's something we need to ask them and make sure, so that we couldn't potentially get sued.
Yeah, I have the anecdotal answer to that, which is that we're not liable, but I don't have the exact language from DPR, so I can certainly ask them for it. And if we want to withhold a vote until we have that confirmation,
I'd be fine voting to support it, as long as that's a stipulation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no expectation that we'd be liable for anything with DPR, excuse me. What they've asked is a good faith agreement to maintain the mural for roughly 3 to 5 years. Afterwards, it's people come and go, and it just becomes too difficult to enforce. But that's the extent of the ask, is essentially a handshake agreement on that. But let's continue with some of the other questions that people have had, and then we'll see if that in fact is the last bridge we need to cross. One of the other questions became about community input. If we agree that supporting it through funding is not a necessary way to express community input, then the other way would be to get their buy-in on the art itself. Cameron's offered to put together 3 to 4 concepts that we could bring to the community and let them vote on which one they like best. And Cameron would happily go with that. So I think we have that box checked. I think the last thing that we just have to ask ourselves is whether, I want to preface this by saying I don't think anyone has bad intentions in this, or anyone's motives are anything but good. But there are reasonable questions that might be asked about the mural project, about whether this was done in the right sequence of events. So for example, Cameron's business, Watermark, is a private business. Are we helping to publicize a private business in a way that we shouldn't be? Should we, if we're going to be the applicant on this, do we need to organize an RFP process to give other vendors an opportunity to bid? That kind of stuff. What if more people come to us and say, well, we want to do a mural project with you too? Are we comfortable with the justification by which we would say no? If in fact we wanted to say no. Are there other questions about that in that kind of vein that people have, or concerns that people have that we might just kind of bubble up to the surface here?
You have described my concerns, Jeff.
I was waiting for you, Amanda.
I feel like I'm
Jeff,
the devil sitting on one shoulder and Carol's on the other shoulder, with Carol being like, we should have art in every place in all aspects of the community. And I'm like, this isn't a scalable option, then we have to decline.
Just so we're clear, Amanda.
Yeah.
And Jeff, the only thing I would say, if DPS, or I'm sorry, Denver Parks and Rec is allowing it, there is a process that they go through for public art on artist selection and community involvement and things like that. And I'll say it again, it would be my recommendation that we follow a similar process, which is what you described, but I also have made my point, and I understand we want that this is an opportunity, but I think if we don't follow the process for the other art that's in the community, we will potentially set ourselves up for criticism from the community.
Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Any other perspectives on that? Let's see, who's on the board that I can ask?
Jeff, I will
Mark,
just say I'm not going to oppose it. I just want everybody to think about that and think about the risk we're taking. Yeah.
I mean, can we approve it with a caveat of, making sure we get some sort of language that we're not liable for the
well, but I think there's this separate question of, is it fair? Despite the good intention, is it fair? If we're putting our name on the application and just sort of doing it in partnership with Watermark, did we skip a step?
I mean, has anybody else brought us a similar request?
I think that is that's an important distinction in my mind, is that we didn't approach Watermark. What we had was a business come to us with an idea, and I don't want to overcomplicate the opportunity to help someone that wants to do something good in the community. They want to do they came to us with an idea for a public art project. As the registered neighborhood organization, we're in a position to help them to do that a little bit faster. And I don't want to lose sight of what our charge as an organization is overall, which is to help get engagement from residents and stakeholders to make this a better community. If we had said, let's go do a mural project, and we know Cameron, we like Cameron, let's do it with Cameron, that feels a little different to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it a little bit differently too, which is I feel like Cameron has laid out something that also aligns with our sort of espoused values as an organization with something that makes the community more inclusive. I don't know that the chicken nuggets, as Brian once called them, on over 20 or between 25th and 26th Avenue on Central Park Boulevard have an inclusivity aspect to them. And I don't know the art pieces well enough to go through all of them and say, hey, here's ones that align with our values or not. But this is one where I feel like a member of our community brought it to us with asking for support. To me, that sounds in alignment. We've also in the past tried to actively support parts of our arts community when they tried to have events too. So I wouldn't say that this would be in any way out of character with how we've acted in the past. So I'm good.
Mark, don't get me started on that or the ellipse in the town center.
Sounds like a beer conversation, right?
Yeah. Jeff, I would move that we approve the mural project contingent on, I assume, just asking the question about liability. I'm assuming since we're not doing the project, we're just making the request, that does lessen our liability, but we should just ask the question.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
I'm happy to do that, but I do want to, Amanda made the point of saying this isn't scalable, and I don't want that to go unacknowledged because it is not scalable. We can't do infinite number of art projects. But I think
I would disagree. I would disagree. The amount of work, I mean, if it's filling out an app, once we've gone through this once and then it becomes an application with Parks and Rec, as long as it's that, I think it could be scalable if we had people come to us with the potential. But us initiating a search and all that kind of stuff, I don't think is sustainable.
Well, it's not scalable from a funding perspective. Like we can't.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Right. So, I mean, to me, my answer to that is I don't think anything about doing one obligates us to doing more. I think we can just say, look, we were able to do this one, and we were able to do it within our funding infrastructure, and until that funding infrastructure changes or the board votes to modify it somehow to accommodate, we won't be able to do another one, something to that effect. But I would hate to think that because we can't do the 10th one, we wouldn't want to do any, if that makes sense. That's how I think about it.
And I think my motion still stands, Jeff, as it's
Okay.
approaching 8:25.
And I still second.
Okay. Contingent on getting the liability release that Brian described.
Yeah, or just getting the question answered.
Do we vote to become the primary name on the applicant for a mural project that will be developed by Cameron Burns?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm gonna say I vote yes as well.
Just ask if there's any objections.
Any objections? None. Okay, I will. I'll write Cameron with that news. I'll make sure he has the. Get that liability release, and we'll be good to go.
A quick question before we move on for the from the votes, but I'm glad that it now says the treasurer's report for the bike rack grant. Do we need to vote on funding that? Because I'm going to be ordering those tomorrow, and didn't want to have to wait a month to get the funding for it.
Oh, wait, what do you need, Mark?
You want to vote on, we received a check as the sponsoring organization. So
Yeah.
We already have the money in the bank. And I just want to make sure we're okay that we don't need to, if we need to vote on using those funds as appropriated.
Yes. Do you want to make the motion?
Yes, I move to allow me to spend up to the amount of the grant that we received for bike racks on bike racks.
Second.
Per the grant requirements.
Any objections? No? Okay. And we'll go to the treasurer's report. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah,
news.
and also I would say is the current reserve of $15,450 includes the fact that we will be paying the $6,000 and then the $2,100 for the bike wrecks. So that puts our reserve back down to about roughly $8,000, which is sufficient, and I don't think there's any issues. But it does bring up the fact that we need to be talking about Nation Builder before we get to January of 2024. Other than that, if anybody has any questions, let me know.
Thanks, Brian. So that'll be a topic for the board in March or April. All right. I think that's it. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you to the education committee, because I found I'm still stunned and amazed that they got the superintendent of DPS to come, and I'm thrilled that we had such a good conversation. So thank you for doing that.
And now we've established, we made a precedent, right? So it can happen again.
Yeah, thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
It has happened before though. Like it's not, this wasn't the precedent was that the superintendent came to a meeting with us. It had just been years since Boasberg, and it didn't happen under Cordova. So I'm happy to have reestablished a relationship with DPS at this point after a couple of tumultuous years. And thank you for the kudos, and thank you for all.
And before yes, thank you for that, Amanda. That was great to have them though. Before we leave, can I just put in one pitch that all of you non-board members who are still here, please consider joining the board in our upcoming elections in May, because if you're willing to stay this long into our meeting, that shows you're committed to your community, and you definitely should be part of our organization.
Central Park United Neighbors at gmail.com. We will get back to you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Jeff.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks.